morning, everybody. Welcome to the February 28th meeting of the Budget and Facilities Committee. Oops, just got the recording starting in progress. We have with us today, as always, the committee members, Julie Epstein, Adam Block, and myself, Adam Smith. We also have with us our member at large, President Emily Bays, and of course, Mrs. O'Hara and Mr. Restano are here as well as our liaisons. So we have a pretty short agenda today, but some things that we want to dig into that have some meat, which is talking about finalizing our conversation about the capital reserve. We're also going to speak about our 5-year facility plan and specifically intentions to use transfer to capital this year to continue covering some of those capital items. And lastly, we're going to bring up a new business item today to speak about the Port Washington share of the state budget. So with no further ado, I will give the floor to Kathy and we will begin speaking about the capital reserve. And Kathy, I believe you actually have some language that you wanted to propose at the upcoming board meeting. So
Sure.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. So the district currently has 4 different reserves, and reserves are used for basically saving funds that are excess funds from the prior year. We would like to propose a capital reserve to address some of the capital needs that we're seeing that are kind of outside the scope. We wouldn't like to go for another bond because we've just done a lot of capital work. So if I could share my screen.
Should be enabled for you.
So here you can see we've spoken about at past budget and facilities meetings, the ventilation items that we need. They total about $6 million. That doesn't account for escalation costs. And then we also have electrical service upgrades at all of the buildings, which come to about $4 million without escalation costs. So what we would like to propose is a $15 million capital reserve, which I believe would account for the escalation costs, and it would be designated for electrical service upgrades as well as ventilation. We're proposing that it would be for 10 years, and it would be funded just from surplus from budgets. So that's either we didn't expend all of the funds or we received additional revenue. And that's really what the proposal is. I've been working with our attorneys to come up with the exact resolution and proposition. This is something that would require voter approval to set up, to create it and to fund it, as well as to spend it. So we would have to go out to the voters when we do want to spend the funds. So are there any questions? I know we've spoken about this at the prior board meeting.
Yeah, so Kathy, I guess we'll just go around the room, so to speak. I'll go first. So I don't have a question so much as a comment, which is when we go out and ask the voters to approve this capital reserve of, a fairly substantial amount, I'm just wondering how, to me, it's kind of a no-brainer to approve it. It doesn't really commit anybody to anything. We have to actually have the surplus. We have to decide to deposit. Really, all we're asking the voters to approve is creating the account effectively, right? If I understand it correctly. How are we going to message that to people? Like, how are we going to make sure that the community understands that all they're approving is this kind of if-when type of situation, and that they're not going to show up at the voting booth and just see $10 million and start, just voting it down automatically?
Sure.
Do you have any experience in that?
Well, I think it's all about educating our community about the benefits of the reserve. And I think that our new public relations director, she could help us with this, to educate it and to speak about it often so that people do understand it and that they're comfortable with it and they see that there is a good need for this. Several districts across the island, across the state, also have capital reserves. So this is something that's new for Port Washington School District, but not for other schools.
Okay, great. Adam or Emily? Sorry, I meant Adam or Julie, and then Emily. Yeah, Julie, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I didn't know if we were raising hands or not. Sorry. So Kathy, thank you for, and I know we've discussed this. I just had two questions just to clarify for points. First of all, if at the end of the school budget year, we have an excess, we don't have to always, do we, I guess here's the question. We have a choice as into which of our reserve funds that excess will go. So just because, again, we set up this capital reserve excess for these funds does not mean any excess is automatically going into those. So we can choose from one year to the next where we need funding most so as not to, restrict ourselves. Is that my understanding correct in that?
Yes, that is correct. So we have 4 other reserves besides this. We could put money into the teacher's retirement reserve or this reserve.
Or our unrestricted fund or whatever else, right?
Yes, correct.
And then my next question is I know that this has all been discussed around the idea of ventilation, and that's how it's being framed, is for ventilation and electrical upgrades. Is it my understanding in all of these conversations looking forward and in looking at our facilities that long-term project planning, that's the next big facility management we need to deal with? We have a plan for roofs, we have a plan for other upgrades within our facilities. And the reason that we're doing this is because it's time for us to start planning for electrical upgrades and ventilation, because that's our next facility goal. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thanks.
Dr. Block?
So first, I agree with you that this is a no-brainer. I think this is absolutely the right thing to do, and I'm fully supportive of it. And so my brain is now shifting from how we frame it to how we get it passed. One thing that I would recommend is that we've talked a lot, is particularly in the early, late summer, early fall, about air conditioning. I think we should frame this as an air conditioning capital reserve. It is in line with exactly what we're going to do, and just name it that way. I think that will help, because I do have concerns that there are going to be folks that are worried about, I don't know, spending more money during times of inflation and just instinctively, even though they vote yes on the budget, may vote no on this. So, and then I would ask our administrators who have worked in other districts that have set up capital reserves, how they have framed this politically, because this is going to be a separate line item that people can vote yes, no, or say, I don't know enough about this and not vote for. So I think we have to think very thoughtfully, and I don't think that education is necessarily the answer, because I don't think that people are going to get into the weeds on this.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Adam. And I agree with you completely. Emily, you're up. President
So
Bays.
I just wanted to give, thank you. I just wanted to actually give first an answer to your question, Adam, and now Dr. Black's question about, how are we educating? And so just process wise, I guess, and this is your first time around doing budget, we as a board approve our budget, approve what we put on the budget, and then we kind of turn it over to our parent organizations who go out and do the campaigning for us. We do not campaign for the budget. We basically approve it, we support it, but we turn to our parent organizations. We will be going around all of the parent meetings, to the HSA meetings as a board, to discuss the budget. You, Adam Smith, particularly, as the budget chair.
Yeah. And so Emily, I think just we do understand this.
No, I understand. But what I'm trying to say is and the education part is really up to, again, as Kathy put out, our public information officer who's going to help educate. I think we have to be careful, though, Adam Block, the way you're saying to call it air conditioning. I don't get this $15 million number as air conditioning. I get it as ventilation, right? This isn't air conditioning. This is upgraded air ventilation. So my question actually was to Kathy. I've seen other school districts, for instance, our neighbors at Manhasset have a general capital reserve fund. It's not as specific as air ventilation. So my question is, what is the benefit of making it specific, or can you make it? And is 15 million the maximum? How did you come up with that number? Because that's not what air conditioning, Dr. Block's question, going to cost us. So how did you come up with, is there a maximum? I'm just curious about the process, a little bit more about the reserve funds.
Sure. So the reason I went with 15 million is because the school has never had a capital reserve before. So to do air conditioning would be about 60 to 70 million is what we were being told. So
Mhm.
I thought you can have multiple capital reserves also. So I thought these were the most impending projects, was the ventilation and the electrical upgrades, because to get to the air conditioning, you needed these electrical upgrades. So I thought it was prudent to actually start with this, and then you could build on the AC. Or
Excellent.
once people are familiar with the benefits of a capital reserve, introduce an AC capital reserve.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. So just to be clear, the $15 million I noticed it wasn't actually the sum of those two spreadsheets. It has quite a bit of wiggle room. So I assume you've built in some inflation and Mr. Restano's favorite word, scope creep, and whatever else you want to get done in there. And this is really the underlying projects to have the facilities ready for a rollout of air conditioning.
That's correct, because
Yeah.
with everything with COVID and the industries and all of the turmoil that we're seeing now, escalation costs could be 10% or 20%. So we
Or
figured
much more.
yeah, exactly.
Mrs. Brooks has a question as well. So I'm going to use this opportunity to let the other board members speak so we don't have to relitigate all this on Tuesday.
Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. I understand the need for the capital reserve fund. I understand the need for the upgrades and everything. My concern is that going forward in the next couple of years, when federal funding drops off and financially potentially does not stay where it is, even though it's not fully where it should be, when we decide to, will we have, well, what happens when we don't have surplus funds? We simply just don't fund the capital reserve fund for that year, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. And so we first wait and see what our budget needs are for the following year before we decide to take whatever savings we have and commit it into this fund. But what happens if going forward, when the federal aid drops off, if our foundation aid isn't what we should be getting, is less than this year, and we find ourselves strapped, we can't look to the capital reserve fund to claw money back from that. Is that true? It's in there strictly for capital expenditures. Is there an opportunity to take the vote to the public to say we want to take money out of here to put it back into the general budget if we find ourselves strapped? How does that's my biggest concern, that if there's that pot of money sitting there and then we can't touch it, but we need money, it's not fungible.
So that's correct. We would have to go to the voters to ask them to allow us to take money from there and put it into another reserve. The district does have 4 other reserves, which the district has been building up those reserves. They're not completely funded, but that would be an option, is to use some of those reserves to help with the, varying federal funding and everything. But the district is quite, not the district, I'm sorry, New York State believes, because of all of the revenue from the online betting, they're thinking that future budgets will actually be strong. So they're not as concerned as we all were initially this year. So that remains to be seen, but it is a good plan.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I have another question, just one more. You may have said this before in a previous meeting, and I'm sorry if I haven't retained it, but how does putting money, if at all, does putting money into the capital reserve affect the tax levy, or does it have any other effect on the tax levy or people's taxes or anything else? The way transfer to capital affects the tax levy, does this have?
No, it does not, because it's only funded by a surplus from the prior year's budget. So if there's a surplus, the board could decide to put money into this capital reserve or into any one of the other 4 reserves that they have, or to just give it back to the taxpayers.
At some future time, when if we vote to take it out of the capital reserve, does it then affect the tax levy? Is there any tax
No.
levy implication whatsoever? at
No,
any-
it doesn't, because we're not actually levying taxes. So the taxes, you have a capital exclusion, but that's because you're levying taxes to cover the capital exclusion. This is already funding that was put aside for this purpose.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure and be clear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking my questions.
I see Dr. Block has his hand raised, and then I think we should probably just bring this to a committee vote.
Okay, so the only other point I want to add is I just want to double down on the fact that I think that while I believe Mrs. O'Hara will get the language just right for the capital reserve, when we market this, we need to call this an AC fund, because in large part, that is what the voters care about. And then bringing up Deb's point, which is that this will have 0 tax impact. I think we need to market this, that it has 0 tax impact, because I think anytime you say fund, taxpayers think I am paying for this fund, and in reality, they are not paying for this fund. So this is a year that I expect there to be a slightly tougher budget fight. And, Emily, I'm going to slightly disagree with you here. Like, while we hand this off to other organizations to do the marketing, at the end of the day, if they don't succeed, it's on us. So we have to, be as prescriptive as necessary to make sure that this goes through.
Yeah, I agree with that, Adam. I think that even though, again, I believe that there's legal restrictions, correct, on how the board and the district
Correct.
can
We
market the
can't-
budget, but
Correct.
we can't spend money to market it, but we do set the message, and we do talk about it. So the point is, we have to be clear in what the message is, while making sure that we rely on, obviously we rely on the parent organizations to fund the actual advertising to support the budget, but we certainly are the ones who set the message.
We have plenty
And I
of
think that's
purchase.
it's
set
an
the
important
message-
distinction.
To vote. We set the message to vote. We cannot
Yes,
set the
guys.
message in which direction someone votes. We can
Yeah.
only set the message to answer the
As
question.
a Board of Education, we cannot say you must vote for the budget.
No,
As a
of course
Board
not.
Or
Of course not.
encourage.
But we can describe why we would support, why we're supporting.
You can
why we're
say as an
proposing this.
individual, as an
Yeah, of
As an
course.
individual. board.
individual,
Yeah.
Be careful.
very slippery slope. Yes. Oh.
Okay. Well, go ahead, Julie.
I'm just going to add my 2 cents. I really do think that if we are going to start marketing this as a AC capital reserve, I do have my druthers with that. I'm concerned about it. I do think that there are taxpayers that are not within the schools, and they will see this as a very big price tag to their property taxes. And I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that Ms. O'Hara and Mr. Restano are laying this out in terms of a long-term 5-year facility plan addressing the electrical and ventilation upgrades, because those are where we are at our facilities. And if the end result leads us to an air conditioning plan, we can market it at that time. But I do think we need to be mindful that we are serving all taxpayers, not just those that have students in schools. And some may be very concerned to see that their property taxes would potentially be affected long-term with an air conditioning budget. I just want to be mindful, which is I think what Ms. O'Hara and Mr. Restano were doing. So I'm just putting that out there.
So one more thing. So let's bring this up to the full board, because while I don't think I necessarily agree with you, I respect the opinion, and this is exactly what the board should be sort of like, figuring out this message. So I think this is an appropriate topic to bring up to the full
Yeah.
board at the March 8th meeting.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Thank you.
Great. So moving forward, I'm going to ask the committee to vote that we are recommending to the board to proceed with this yet to be named capital reserve. And that's, I guess, what we'll discuss in terms of the name. Ms. O'Hara, you're raising your hand.
Sure. I just want to clarify. I will have language in there that says HVAC, But to call it an AC reserve, we would likely have to increase it to like $70 million. So is it okay to assume that we're going to leave it at $15 million? If we want to do some AC upgrades, we can, but I think you would need to do another capital reserve to actually address district-wide AC.
I think that's a really good point. And since we're not funding the entirety of what it would take to air condition the entire building, I would be inclined to leave it as it is. That's my personal opinion. Just I guess we can discuss it as a whole board, but to me, I think we can rely on those who are going to be discussing this with the community and how we refer to it, that people will understand what in fact they're getting and that this is the precursor to air conditioning. And I think that, the school families will understand that, and we have to, make sure that we're sensitive with how we present it to the broader community. So I would leave it as it is personally.
Okay, thank you.
So should we vote? All in favor of recommending this capital reserve to the board at the next meeting? So that's for those who are watching, Adam and Julie both raised their hands. So that's yes. I'm going to recommend this to the board. Great. The next item that we're going to talk about today is the 5-year facility plan that we've been speaking about, and specifically how that translates to transfer to capital that we're going to be proposing in this year's budget. So again, I believe that Ms. O'Hara and Mr. Restano have some proposals to share with us. You're muted, Mrs. O'Hara.
I do, and I had it up on my screen, but now I'm looking for it. So I apologize. We're going to have to just speak about it, Jim, because I can't locate it. But the first we had was Daily Elementary School Roof Project for $837.4 million. I'm sorry, $837,000. The Weber Roof Project for $462,000. The Manor Haven Roof Project for $78,000. The high school running track resurfacing for $198,000. And then the Daily Elementary School exterior masonry reconditioning for $286,400. Then we had unanticipated projects of $161,000. But after speaking with our architect, and he was saying that it could be as much like 10% or even higher. 10% would be another $186,000. So we're not sure if the $2,023,000 is actually enough. So Jim, did you want to speak to anything?
No, I believe you. I believe you said exactly, and the architect had the same reaction that I had. I think at the last meeting with everything that's going on with construction. It's very hard to anticipate escalation, but that is I guess it's a pretty good number, 10% for what's going on now, going forward.
So we would like to leave the transfer to capital flat with what it was last year and hope that the escalation costs aren't much more than like 8%, but.
So, I think that that's very wishful thinking at 10%, especially with, what's going on with the oil prices right now. That obviously impacts even, transportation for these companies. So would the idea be to kind of prioritize the projects and just do what you can when you say keeping it flat?
Yes, yeah, because our focus is the roofs, which the roofs we believe we could cover. But then with the exterior masonry reconditioning at Daily or the track, those would be things that might have to be postponed.
Yeah. Emily?
Sorry. Okay, so my question is, what would happen if it wasn't flat? So what if we raised it? We have, we've, again, history-wise, we started talking a little bit back in history. I think we first started with a 1.5 and then it went to like 1.8 and then it went to 2. So my question is, what happens if we raise it? Like, what happens to the formula? What happens to all of our numbers? Like, can you explain a little bit the math about that?
Sure. So that would increase your tax cap levy, the allowable tax cap levy. So right now we're at 2.58 is our allowable tax cap. If we were to increase it, it might go up to like 2.6. So if we increased it by 100,000, it wouldn't be very significant, but it would impact that.
So you don't think it's worth increasing it? You don't think it's worth increasing? Like, you don't think, let's say if we increased it by 200,000, would it help us in any way, or is it detrimental to us if we do it that way?
I believe it would benefit because these are projects that are a high priority. We listed them as a 1 on a scale of 1 to 4. So
right.
I think it would benefit the district. I just wasn't sure what your comfort level is with the tax cap.
I mean, I think we have to be careful as it relates to the overall budget and the tax cap. So I think this might be, Emily, something to put the cart before the horse when we hear about the overall budget. And maybe it's something we can.
Well, I think this is something that the greater board needs to discuss.
Right.
Because
that's what I'm saying.
Right. This is part of so I think on the March 8th meeting, we need to add this as part of, so I know, Kathy, you're talking again, budget, obviously we're discussing budget again on March 8th, but I think maybe that's part of your presentation is how do we, what happens if it's a $2 million, what can we do? Like just giving the numbers and let the board make a decision on what they're comfortable with, because like you said, they're number one, there are projects that are at the 1 level, and we should probably just discuss it.
Sure.
Oh, there we go.
So this is the numbers that we were just discussing. And you can see from the prior years, 2019,
Yep.
20, you were at 880. Then we increased to $1.4 million. The current year is $2.023 and we were also proposing the same. So you have gradually increased, which, would be fine also, but I will present to you.
So, yeah, because, so Kathy, when you present it, if you could also then say, what would present the numbers if we increased it to 2.2 million, let's say this year, what would be the change, and what would
on
be
the tax rate? Yes.
Yeah.
On the tax rate,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, because, maybe this is a year in light of all the extra costs, in light of all the high costs now with, as Adam pointed out, the oil prices and so forth. Maybe this is the year to increase it a little bit. So that's what I would propose, and then let the board decide.
And I think we're also due to discuss with the board, we've brought it up a few times, but we need to close the loop on it as to whether or not this is the year to start the playground standardization. And I'm wondering if this meeting would be, maybe the board says, no, this isn't the year to do it, but we do have to have that conversation, because at the prior budget meeting that we spoke about it, there certainly was, support from the other board members who aren't on this committee to have that be a discussion item about at least starting that program. And we had discussed, Kathy, that might be something that would be part of transfer to capital moving forward. Certainly not to bump any of these more important items, but it is certainly an important item. So maybe we talk about what that would look like if we were to think about including that when you have that.
So maybe that, okay. But yeah,
I mean, and everyone will see, maybe it's something that, we would need to get input from, from the parent organizations if it's something they think they could advocate for at this level, being where we already are. But we should at least understand what it would mean if we were going to do that.
Right, but maybe that's part of, like you said, maybe that's part of a longer, like not this year, but going forward, right? Because
but I think we should talk about it. We should see what it would look like and know what the commitment would be on an annual basis in that transfer to capital. And then maybe the board says, hey, we can't do it this year. Or maybe it says, we just have to close the loop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, Kathy.
Yes.
Julie, you're up.
Just for my question on the playground issue, I'm fine to have the discussion at the board meeting. I just want to ask, is the discussion, have we worked out is it a presentation of all of the parameters of how not only just what we would increase if we were to increase transfer to capital with a line item of dollar amount, but how the money is distributed, how it works, who qualifies for need?
Well, Mr. Restano had created a document of basically saying to bring that we would set a base year as basically the oldest we would accept. And his proposal had been to take the oldest first and basically just go round robin through the district, replacing the oldest pieces until we were, over years until we were caught up.
Right, but I remember Sousa had the greatest price tag to that, and like almost $700,000. And if we're doing that to catch up, it's highly possible that other schools would not be able to benefit. So that's one of the issues of equity that we were kind of discussing. And I'm happy to have this as a broader discussion at a board meeting, but I just want to make sure that when we're having this discussion, some of these parameters have been worked out, and it's highly possible they have. I just am putting it out there.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I think we would need the administration to present to us what the proposal would be and what the annual cost would be. Maybe, if they want to allocate X dollars per year, and, we'd have to create a parameter or they would have to create a parameter by which it's done fairly. But I wouldn't envision we would go, one school would get 700,000 before any school got anything else. I'm sure there's a way to just rotate. Anyway, so does any of the other BOE trustees who are on have anything to say about transfer to capital? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Mrs. O'Hara. So I don't think we have a vote on this because we're going to be discussing it at the upcoming BOE meeting. And then the last topic for today is a new business item. And Emily, this is really your brainchild. So I think I'll just give you the floor to talk about the Port Washington share of the state budget.
Thank you. I like the word brainchild though, too. I have a lot of brainchilds. So Kathy, I just wanted to bring back, so we've talked a lot, and I know that the governor has gotten a lot of credit for having presented an executive budget that had a great increase in funding for education. And in fact, all school districts are now getting fully funded with the foundation aid money that was, and I'm going to say this carefully, due to us, right? So we're getting the money that was due to us. So I'd like to ask for you to give us some sort of understanding. What is in the executive budget that, for instance, mental health money has been put aside in the executive budget, from what I understand. Pre-K money has been put aside as like new money funding that she's doing, but it is going only to, my understanding, school districts that are deemed high need. And Port Washington does not fall under that category. So in light of, I guess, past campaigns that we've done as a school district about getting our fair share, I would like for us to get a better understanding. Should we be talking to our legislators and getting more funding for Port Washington other than what is rightfully owed to us in foundation aid? So could you give us an understanding of that?
Sure, and thank you. You bring up very excellent points about this. Actually, to be fully funded, we should be receiving an additional 4.6 million. For next year, we'll be getting half of that, the 2.3 million. And this is something that was due to the district the past several years from foundation aid. When it was first put into effect, you were never fully funded. So this is the governor's effort for that. There are grants out there to make school districts more green, because they would like all school buses, I believe, is part of her proposed budget to be electric, but yet there's no funding for it. But if you are a high needs district, there is money for that, and also for the mental health. So districts, regardless of their wealth, all have mental health needs, support for that. And working under a 2% tax cap, you're not able to expand your budget as much, whether you're wealthy or high needs. So this is an area that we should pursue with legislatures to get increased funding, and things that other schools may be getting, we should be able to apply for.
So Emily, is that
Yeah.
something you want to handle at
I do.
legislative task? Yeah.
Well, I want to take it to the board. I don't know that we need to go to legislative task force. So I would like Adam, and we can do this as part of our discussion on Tuesday. I would like to take it to the entire board, because if the board agrees that we as a school board should be advocating for more funding for Port Washington, then we don't need to go to the legislative task force, right? That the legislative task force would send it back to the board anyway. So I want everybody to be on the same page and understand that we're advocating for more funding, and then I could take it from there and advocate with the legislators. I do have a question. So you understand, wait, before I move on with that, Adam, that you understand that? Like, let's take it right to the board now.
That makes perfect sense.
Okay. So Kathy, what about the pre-K funding? Can you explain that to me? Because I've been I really don't understand, like there's all this pre-K funding. Can you explain pre-K funding? Sorry.
Sure. So the pre-K funding, the district has remained flat for the last several years. We do have a pre-K program that is funded by these funds, but also some taxpayers' money as well. Some school districts don't have pre-K, universal pre-K programs. So if they want to expand and create a pre-K program, there is funding available for them. So for Port Washington, you're not receiving additional pre-K. It's just staying flat.
So Port Washington has really, in my understanding with this budget, has really stayed flat.
Yes.
As the only thing we got is the money that was due to us, half of the money that was due to us, the other half is supposed to come next year. So this initial runs that we got has really shown Port Washington with no increases in budget. Other than the 2.6, what I mean, I'm just trying to put it in perspective that we haven't really. Did we get any other funding? Have we received any increases in any other other lines?
Well, just in foundation aid, and there were some slight adjustments with computer aid and BOCES aid. So you did receive slight, but that's because BOCES is
changed
related to your expenditures. Yeah.
That I'm just trying to be clear on that, because that's my message to the legislators is that, what are you doing to campaign for us? Because what did we get other than what was owed to us? So I want to be clear that I'm clear on that.
Okay. Emily, is there something we could create? All these it's just a little bit nebulous. We're speaking in generalizations. Is there some way that you can think of that we could kind of contextualize this with some kind of document or a chart just to I think if we could, that might be really helpful to have.
So we could do that. And I think that's what I wanted to just initially get from here. And then we could take it when we go back to the board and the board agrees, then I would definitely go to our legislators with a presentation. I would never go just to know.
Well, should we maybe have the presentation before we discuss it at the board so that
at the board meeting, we can maybe talk about it.
Yeah.
We could do it.
What I mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'll work it.
Because I'm sure the board's going to say yes.
Look who I'm looking at. Can you tell who I'm looking at?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Adam, go ahead.
So since Emily brought up pre-K funding, I'd love to actually just get a sense of what pre-K if you can just speak briefly about what pre-K in this district looks like. I moved to this district with twins that were at the pre-K level. We never considered whether we even had the option to send them to public pre-K after sending our kids to universal pre-K in New York City. We went private at a huge expense. And so I'd just love to hear, I know that, Adam Smith, you have a kid in pre-K.
Yeah. It's certainly not something that's well publicized, I would imagine.
So I'd like to hear what the program looks like, what the hours are, and where the funding comes from. And just to get an overview of it, because I was a former pre-K parent and I don't have a clue about it.
Sure. So I'm sure that's something we could prepare for you. I'm not that familiar with the hours of anything.
Yeah. So what we can do, I can actually put this in the board packet, so you can have it on Thursday, and we'll outline everything. But from a 30,000 foot perspective, it's really generally geared toward our students, free and reduced lunch. It's a really great program. It's not open to everyone, as you probably all know. It's capped at a certain number. Listen, I think many of us would agree if we could expand our pre-K program in multiple ways, that'd be incredibly helpful, not only for the families, but for the students. Then there's the question of space, there's the question of who's funding it, all those different things. But the foundation for what our students need is definitely there. We have several teachers, but we'll provide that information for you this Thursday.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Hines. Emily, if you want to
Yeah,
go, and then we'll
I
jump
do.
to
I
community
want to
comments.
just add that before all of the craziness of the COVID surge, we, meaning myself and Julie, had spoken to Dr. Hines about doing a pre-K presentation to the board because we thought it'd be important that we discuss. And again, as the beginning of like we were expecting, there has been a lot of discussion by the governor about having, pre-K, expanding pre-K programs across the state. So Julie and I had asked Dr. Hines to get a pre-K presentation to be given to the board. And I know that it was kind of put together, and then we had to put it off because of all of the surge and all of the COVID conversations we were having. But I would like Dr. Hines, if we can, to put it back on our agenda, maybe not now during our meetings when we're doing budget discussions, but clearly I think even going forward, we should have that, in our discussion topic world, because I think it is important for us as a school district to talk about our pre-K program, as Dr. Black pointed out, and where do we stand as a board, and what do we want to do? Do we want to expand it? Do we want to give more access? Because right now, Dr. Block and Mr. Smith, it is not open to your children, really. It's for, again, I'm making an assumption, but it's for free and reduced lunch only. And then there's a lottery. So, we're very limited in the amount of students that we can take. If we as a board support having more access and opening it up, then we would have to fund it, right? And so that's something that we should definitely talk about going forward.
Yeah.
I would like to talk about it, actually.
Yeah, I'll be happy to do that for sure.
And this is Emily, this is a question you might know the answer to. This is probably a very stupid question, but could a public school district have a fee-based pre-K? Could they operate a non? Is that it, Dr. Hines?
Yeah, sure. So what some school districts do, my previous school district, they contract out for the program. So for instance, Scope runs a really great program, Head Start. If that was around, they offer that as well. So that could happen. Again, when we talk about this, and I'm thrilled that we're talking about this. I think it's incredibly important. I really, really do. It'll come down to, do we have the space? That's really fundamentally what it's going to come down to. But we can certainly unpack this. We do have a presentation, as Emily said before, and then we can discuss this further in a lot of detail.
Fantastic. So I think that'd be a very good use of our time. So I'm actually going to see if anybody else has any other comments or new business, and if not, we'll jump to community comments. No? So if anyone in the community wishes to speak, if you could please raise your hand. Going once, going twice. Okay, so looks like we have nobody raising their hand that I can see from community comments. So if nobody has anything else, I guess we can say goodbye and everyone enjoy your week. Happy Monday.